Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. Not yet. Please remain standing for our gospel reading. I just got to switch programs here. Sorry. My program reset. I need a Bible because Joe forgot to put the gospel reading in his. There should be one right there. Forgot to put it in my iPad. Told you I was human. Yeah, I just have to prove it every week, one way or another. That's the hymnal. One down. Oh, I have it in Spanish. Oh, thank you. Oh, goodness. Mark. A reading from the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat. Just as he was with him in the boat, just as he was, other boats were with him. Okay. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The word of God for the people of God. Now you can be seated. It is interesting that my sermon is titled Be Still, and we're going to talk a little bit about prayer and stillness and being focused, and there I just proved how focused I was this week by not even putting our gospel reading into my program. I guess I'll be preaching to myself today, because I need this lesson as well as anybody else does, which isn't a bad thing. So, today's gospel speaks of a great disturbance, so great that the disciples who are fishermen have fear for their own lives. Now, these are guys who've been out on this lake many a time. So it must have been something really spectacular. One commenter points out that this is a remarkable story. Mark is not particularly interested in geographical details, but gets Jesus and his disciples to cross the sea. Now, I've mentioned before that in Mark, it isn't a very sedentary gospel. Jesus is always on the move. He has a lot of coming and going in the Mark's gospel. Jesus just decides out of nowhere to just up and leave, but instead of walking around the lake, he decides to jump in a boat and go across. Or they could have walked anywhere else. But they decided to cross the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee, for a little information, is also known as Kinneret or Kinnereth, the Lake of Gennesaret or Lake Tiberias. It's a freshwater lake. It's about 33 miles around and about 13 miles long and 8 miles wide. So its whole area is about 64 square miles. at its fullest, and the maximum depth is approximately 141 feet at its deepest. And at levels between 705 feet and 686 feet below sea level, it is the lowest of freshwater bodies, and the second lowest body of water in the world, with the Dead Sea being the lowest. The lake is fed partly from underground springs, and its main source, of course, is the Jordan River, which flows through it. So it gives you an idea of the area that they're in. Crossing the Sea of Galilee is no big deal, most of the time anyway. And well, Jesus is with a bunch of fishermen, so what can go wrong? Well, we hear a storm of great wind arises, which is fairly common, yet the disciples panic. The waves are coming into the boat, and the boat is starting to fill, and yet Jesus sleeps. And that could be a miracle story in itself. So this got me wondering what a boat looked like, that Jesus was able to sleep and not really be disturbed. And luckily, back in the 80s, they discovered a boat from the 1st century AD, which was assumed to be just like most Galilean boats. And it's also known as the Jesus boat. The boat is 27 feet long, 7.5 feet wide, and a height of 4.5 feet or so. So Jesus could have been sleeping on some sort of seat, since the boat is 7.5 feet wide at its widest point. But how he did not roll off in rough waters is beyond me. How did he not get wet? Now, frankly, either the disciples are panicking for no reason at all, or Jesus can sleep well, balanced while rocking violently in a wet boat. I suspect, knowing the disciples, they are panicking for no good reason at all. Mark has a habit of portraying the disciples as rather bumbling. So the disciples are panicked for no good reason, or maybe one good reason, so that we might learn to trust the Lord. As often happens in these parts, a storm comes up unexpectedly, and the disciples panic, accusing Jesus of indifference to their fate. Like someone calming a boisterous dog, Jesus orders the sea to behave, and it does. Then he rebukes the disciples for the first time, indicating the importance of faith to them. The importance of faith. The importance of trusting God. The importance of looking to see God, paying attention to see God active in our lives. If you want to see Jesus, you got to show up, as they say. You must look for them in all the unexpected places. How many times are we caught up in our own storms, or our own mishaps, our own illnesses, weaknesses, needs, fears, our own I got to have it now? How many times do we, in our most significant hours of need, lift up prayers in dire earnest? And how often, in our least important moment of the day, do we nonchalantly turn to the Lord and just say, please God? Yet in the end, they all have the same measure, and in the end, we rarely look to see the answer. We rarely pause to say, thank you, Lord. We rarely stop to acknowledge God's presence. Now, I'm not saying we do not do it. We at least do it or think about it on Sunday, I hope. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But I pray that the other 6 days may have some events in them. I'm just asking because this little passage got me to thinking. Now, this calming of the sea happened neither here nor there. It happened en route from one place to another. And a commenter points out, and I'm bringing this up because it's one of my favorite things, Jesus likes to show up in, quote, liminal places, in between times, in between spaces, sites of transition or risk. He chooses to go to marginal spaces away from life's regular patterns, near a graveyard in Mark 5, at a deathbed later in Mark 5, or even hoisted atop Golgotha. He situates himself at geographical boundaries lands like the wilderness, Mark 1, or mountaintops, Mark 3, 6, and 9, Tyre, Mark 7, Caesarea Philippi, and Mark 8. It also gives you an idea how much he's moving around. He also goes to social-political borderlands, politically charged locations like a tax collector's house, or the land outside of Jerusalem at Passover time. The Sea of Galilee was both these kinds of places. Geographically, it separated one shore from the other, one group of people from another. Sociopolitically, it provided sustenance to Galileans and generated resources that Rome could extract from those who depended on it to make a living. It kept populations distant from each other, and it fed imperial appetites. This is important on two aspects. Symbolically, calming the waters that are so agitated by imperial power could symbolize the effect that Jesus' life has on all powers that be. And eventually, they will calm by Christ's command one way or another. But the first part of this comment that I just read to you says, Jesus likes to show up in the liminal spaces. I love this. Jesus in the in-between space, the spot where you are neither in or out. That place where you are neither here nor there. The scariest of all places, where it's the liminal space where we tend to be the most insecure. The transitional times, we tend to be most insecure. The most frightening and sometimes the most lost. It's in these places we often go in prayer, seeking help, seeking answers. It's in these most difficult of times in life that Jesus shows up. But we would never see it or hear Jesus, the Spirit, or God if we did not stop to listen. Now, I'm not sure if Jesus' command to be still is strictly for the sea. I can't help but wonder if it wasn't for the disciples as well. Here they're all panicking and nudging him, wake up, there's a storm coming. And finally Jesus just gets up and says, be still. So is he talking to the water, or is he telling them to stop and be still? Or both? Stillness is one of the most sacred traditions of how we find God in our home, in our offices, out and about in the day. Being still is about, well, as old as the song says, that we sang today, be still. Or as the old song from the 60s or 70s, I forget which, it says, put your hand in the hand of the man who stilled the water. There is a author and lyricist and word artist, Tara Crox, who shares her newfound experience of stillness while on a walk. She says, when I moved from the noisy concrete and steel canyons of New York City to a small Hudson Valley village with its serenely forested highlands, I was stunned by the radical change of scenery. As late summer turned into fall, my favorite season, nature's magic began its work on me. From one of my first autumn walks along the wooded mountain path behind an old Victorian house that was my new home, I was introducing uncanny voices of the natural world. My first encounter with what I call Earth Speak was nothing less than phenomenal for its impact on my life and sensibility. As I came around a bend at the top of the mountain, the lush goldenness of the maples along the trail nearly took my breath away. They colored the very air around them. As I stood transfixed, it seemed that all the flora in the woods began to sway towards me. The dramatic red, orange, gold hues in all shapes and sizes were pulsating with light. Sounds and scents so intoxicating that I wasn't sure if I was breathing or drinking. When suddenly I heard a whispering of words that I'll never forget. They said, yes, the very thing you humans love about us. Our different colors and shapes and smells and languages are the things you often hate about each other. Alas, you have lost touch with your beauties because you have lost touch with us. Having just moved out of a city teeming with tensions that densely populated diversities of culture, creed, economy, and yes, race, too often provoke, this message was stunning and timely for me, she says. During that first year of life in the country, I became unusually acquainted with this sentient world. In my daily walks with pen and paper, the presence of nature enfolded me with their lushness while I chronicled their wisdom teaching. As these inner tuitions invited me to consider some of the most paradoxical mysteries, they required only one thing of me, she says. They required only one thing: to be utterly present and receptive. I didn't know what to call it at that time. I was only aware that I felt light and free as all the space around the trees and the flowers and the blades of grass all around and even inside me. To be utterly present and receptive. That's a spiritual practice. It requires one to be still, and not just still. Stillness of mind, stillness of heart. We need to create our own in-between space, if you will, between the things you have just finished doing and the next thing on your to-do list. Many people begin their day with morning meditation or quiet time. That attunes you and sets your whole day. I have my quiet time in the morning in my office, but I also strive for a midday. I said strive, I don't always succeed. Even if it's just 10 minutes just to still the mind and find God or take a deep breath, to close all the books, to shut the computer. Hopefully the phone won't ring. Time to be still, to slow down, to listen for God and the Spirit's still small voice. It's not easy to do, and it does take dedication and practice. And did you know it takes 3 months of doing the same thing every day at the same time for it to move past practice and to become a habit? So it takes 3 months of setting time aside and being still, or even if it's just 5 minutes. It takes 3 months from that to move from an intentional practice into a habit. But it's a good habit to have. And once you got that 5 minutes in, maybe you can stretch it to 10. And yet, we're not all built the same. For some, absolute stillness could be maddening. You got to be always on the move. You're one of those people. And there's many ways to be still even while being active. Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a mystic, scholar, activist, and a Vietnamese monk, who wrote over 25 books, including Living Buddha, Living Christ, which I recommend reading if you get a chance. He also wrote a book on walking meditation. He says, many of us walk for the sole purpose of getting from one place to another. Now suppose we are walking to a sacred place. We would walk quietly and take each gentle step with reverence. I propose that we walk this way every time we walk on earth. The earth is sacred and we touch her with each step. We should be very respectful because we are walking on our mother. If we walk like that, then every step will be grounding, every step will be nourishing. Walking meditation unites our body and our mind. We combine our breathing with our steps. When we breathe in, we may take 2 or 3 steps. When we breathe out, we may take 3 or 4 or 5 steps. Pay attention to what is comfortable for our body as we move. Our breathing has the function of helping our body and mind to calm down. As we walk, we can say, breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I bring peace to my body. Calming breaths calms the body and reduces any pain and tension, he says. We can also, as Christians, combine our breathing with a simple prayer or an intention for the day that you might want to lift up. This calms and centers the mind, creates an inner stillness that makes room for God to slip on in and journey with us. Many people engage this stillness by praying a labyrinth. And there is a website where you can find labyrinths in your area that are free to walk. Labyrinths have been used as a sacred path and spiritual resource by pilgrims for centuries. And some say they originated as a scaled-down version of making a pilgrimage, because not everybody could afford to pack up all their belongings and go walk the Holy Land. People who couldn't travel to a holy place, they would go to a labyrinth made of stone, turf, or ink on paper even, and they're different than mazes. They're not full of tricks or traps. They're just a simple pathway in and a simple pathway out where we walk intentionally, breathe slowly, connect to God with our intentions. The meandering labyrinth pathway can be seen as a metaphor for life's journey. Walking the labyrinth with the intention of revisiting one's life can invite memories to appear and reformed with new connections and new meaning for now. I've seen people walk the labyrinth in silence. I have seen people dance their way through the labyrinth. Again, everybody's way of connecting is different. There's no right or wrong way to pray. It's funny, when I was learning to be a chaplain working at Children's Hospital, they would take about 6 to 8 students during a 6-week period, and we would work on practices. And it was a young student who was studying to be a rabbi who said, "You have to teach me how to pray. I don't know how to pray." You guys wrote the Psalms. What do you mean you don't know how to pray? Just pick up a psalm, pay attention to it, read it slowly. That's prayer. And if all else fails, just say, "Hey, God, can you give me a minute?" There are many ways to pray. Finally, I will mention art as a form of prayer as well. We have a room full of artists here, whether you know it or not. Everybody is an artist. Some are better than others, but everybody is an artist. For any type of creativity is an art form. That means cooking, writing, gardening, singing. Doesn't have to be in tune. Knitting, photography, the list goes on and on. Sometimes, though, we need to be intentional about our time for art and creativity. We need to nourish it with prayer. Personally, I love the Artist's Way, which is up here. Matter of fact, up here are several different ways of praying. The Lesson of Love by Julian of Norwich is a mystical experience of the crucifixion that she wrote about. It's a good journey. Don't read it all at once. It's a lot. There's a book on crafting calm, another way of using art. There's a book here on Path to Prayer, just many different ways of praying. And of course, The Artist's Way is here. And since its first publication, The Artist's Way turned into a phenomenon. It's inspired millions of readers to embark on a creative journey and find deeper connection to the process and the purpose. Julia Cameron's novel approach to guides readers in uncovering problem areas and pressure points that may be stopping them from working or creating or releasing their inner artist. She helps with techniques to free up any areas that might be stuck, opening up opportunities for self-growth and self-discovery and different ways of praying. The program begins with one of the most vital tools, which she recommends doing, is every morning you sit down with pen and paper and just write. No topic, no goal of what needs to be written, just 3 pages of free-form, free-flowing writing. Just a stream of consciousness. And then she also recommends an artist date, which, whether you're an artist or not, I recommend. This is just taking a day dedicated to art. Whether it be God's art in nature, or the art in one of your local museums, or stopping and listening to a street performer. Just be intentional about a date to experience the beauty and creativity that everybody has in this world that they share with us. Nurture your inner artist. She shares hundreds of exercises and activities and prompts to help readers thoroughly explore each chapter. And I have sat down with a group at a church, and we just took that book and did like a chapter every week and shared our experiences with our free form of writing. She has a companion book, so you don't even have to you can just buy the book and write in it. We shared our arts and crafts. We shared our ideas on how we were being inspired, and everybody grew from the process. The morning pages that she recommends become a still, focused prayer for many. The artist date becomes intentional time of creativity and connecting to the spirit as one explores artist venues. But all these things encourage us to find stillness, to find prayer, engage and walk with God so that we may still our own troubled waters. Jesus said, "Be still." Be still. Just breathe in, breathe out. Be still and know that I am God. Amen.